The gavel struck once, echoing sharply across the courtroom. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The sound of shuffling feet filled the air as Judge Morrison took his seat, his eyes fixed on the woman standing before him. She was smiling. Not the nervous kind, but a calm, almost haunting smile that made the entire courtroom uneasy. "Miss Clara Evans," the judge said sternly, "you're being charged with obstruction of justice and perjury. Do you find something amusing about this?" Clara's lips curled into a faint laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't mocking. It was heartbreaking. "Not at all, Your Honor," she replied softly. "I just never thought the truth could sound this funny." Before we go deeper into this powerful story of courage and pain, make sure to subscribe to Sweet Justice, where real emotions meet real consequences, and every courtroom reveals a lesson for life. The judge's brows furrowed. He'd seen anger, tears, and silence in his courtroom, but laughter? Never. "Miss Evans, this is a court of law. If you continue to treat it like a stage, I will hold you in contempt." Clara looked down briefly, her laughter fading into a tremor of grief. Her fingers trembled as she clutched a folded photograph in her hand, one the bailiff had tried to take from her earlier, but she'd refused to let go. "Your Honor," she whispered, her voice suddenly breaking, "if you knew what I've been through, you might laugh too." The judge leaned back, the gavel resting in his palm. For the first time that morning, he didn't know what to say, and that was how the trial of Clara Evans began, the woman who laughed when the world expected her to cry. The courtroom slowly settled after the judge's warning. Reporters scribbled notes while the audience whispered nervously, unsure whether to pity Clara Evans or despise her calm defiance. She sat down at the defendant's table, her posture straight, eyes fixed on the wooden grain of the table in front of her. Her laughter had faded, but its echo seemed to linger, like a melody no one could forget. The prosecutor, a young man named Elliot Brooks, flipped through his notes with visible irritation. "Your Honor," he said, "the defendant's behavior has been erratic from the beginning of this case. We intend to prove that she deliberately lied under oath to protect a man she knew was guilty." The judge nodded. "Proceed." As the prosecutor began his opening statement, Clara's mind drifted far from the courtroom, back to the moment it all began. It had been a rainy evening 6 months earlier. Clara, a nurse at St. Vincent Hospital, was walking home after a double shift. The city lights shimmered through the downpour, and her umbrella trembled in the wind. Halfway down Maple Street, she saw the flicker of red and blue lights. An accident scene. Instinct took over. She ran toward the flashing lights and found a man pinned under a car, bleeding heavily. She knelt beside him without hesitation. "Sir, stay with me," she said, applying pressure to his wound. The paramedics hadn't arrived yet. The driver, a young man barely 20, stood nearby, frozen with shock. "What happened?" she asked him. I didn't see him. He came out of nowhere," the boy stammered. Clara turned back to the injured man. "Hold on, sir. You're going to be fine." But when she looked at his face again, her breath caught. She knew him. He was Daniel Warren, a police officer she'd worked with at the hospital's community unit. A good man. Moments later, the ambulance arrived, but Daniel's pulse was weak. Clara rode with him, her hands stained with his blood. He didn't make it. The next morning, Clara was called in by investigators. They asked her to give a statement about the accident. "It was dark," she said carefully. "The driver said he didn't see Daniel crossing." But then she noticed something on the table, a police report, already typed up. It claimed Daniel had been drunk, stumbling into traffic. Clara frowned. "That's not true," she said. "He was coming from the hospital. He wasn't drunk." The investigator, a man named Detective Hale, gave her a look that chilled her. "Miss Evans," he said quietly, "the department needs to close this quickly." Officer Warren was off duty. "We'd rather not make this messy." Clara's chest tightened. "You're saying you want me to lie?" "I'm saying," Hale replied, "sometimes the truth helps no one." She stared at him, horrified. But what terrified her more was realizing who the young driver was. Ethan Hale, the detective's own son. Days passed, and Clara's world began to crumble. She refused to sign the statement, but soon found herself facing consequences she never imagined. Her hospital suspended her for disruptive behavior. Her apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, just files scattered. And then came the subpoena. She was being charged with perjury. The official claim was that she had tampered with official testimony in the Warren accident case. In truth, she was being silenced. Back in the courtroom, the prosecutor's voice brought her back to the present. Miss Evans knowingly provided false information during the investigation, he declared. She obstructed justice to protect a personal relationship with the deceased. Clara's attorney, a quiet public defender named Maya Lopez, stood up. Objection, Your Honor, that's a serious assumption with no evidence. The judge nodded. Sustained? Mr. Brooks, keep your arguments factual. Clara glanced toward the judge, his expression neutral but his eyes thoughtful. He wasn't convinced either way, Elliot Brooks continued. Then let's hear from the defendant herself. Miss Evans, would you like to explain why you laughed this morning when these charges were read? The courtroom turned to her. Clara smiled faintly again, though her eyes glistened with tears. I laughed, she said softly, because it's the only thing keeping me from breaking down. A hush fell over the room. Even the prosecutor hesitated. I lost a friend, she continued, and now I'm losing my name, my work, and everything I stood for because I refused to lie. The judge leaned forward slightly. Miss Evans, are you saying the official police report was falsified? Clara looked directly at him. I'm saying that justice stopped being justice the moment it became convenient. The judge exhaled slowly, the weight of her words settling over the court like dust in sunlight. That night, after the hearing was adjourned, Judge Morrison stayed in his chambers long after everyone had left. He stared at Clara's file on his desk, photos of the accident, hospital reports, her spotless record as a nurse. Nothing about her screamed criminal. He turned to the photo attached to the case summary. Daniel Warren, the officer who'd died that night. Something doesn't add up, he murmured. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to uncover one of the most heartbreaking truths of his career. The next morning, the courtroom was quieter than usual. The tension from Clara's testimony still lingered in the air like the scent of rain after a storm. Reporters had crowded the hallways outside, their cameras flashing every time the heavy courtroom doors swung open. Judge Morrison sat at the bench, his expression unreadable. But inside he was restless. He'd been on the bench for over 20 years and thought he'd seen everything. Liars, manipulators, guilty men pretending to be saints. But Clara Evans was different. She didn't look like a liar. She looked like someone who'd been broken and rebuilt too many times to care what anyone thought anymore. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. Clara rose as the judge entered. The prosecutor, Elliot Brooks, adjusted his tie, ready to strike again. Maya Lopez, Clara's defense attorney, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Stay calm, she whispered. We're going to turn this around. Miss Evans, said Judge Morrison, we'll continue your testimony. Yesterday you claimed that the police report was falsified. Do you have evidence to support that? Clara took a deep breath. I don't have physical proof, Your Honor, but I know what I saw. Officer Warren wasn't drunk. I was the first person at the scene. I checked his pulse, his eyes, his breath. There was no trace of alcohol. Elliot Brooks smirked. Are you trained to perform toxicology assessments by smell, Miss Evans? A few snickers rippled through the courtroom. Clara didn't flinch. I'm a registered nurse, Mr. Brooks. I've treated hundreds of trauma cases. I know the difference between a man who's drunk and a man who's dying. The judge's gavel tapped lightly. Mr. Brooks, refrain from sarcasm. Proceed with substance, Brooks nodded stiffly. Very well. Miss Evans, do you know the victim's family personally? No. Did you have a romantic relationship with Officer Warren? Clara's jaw tightened. He was my friend. That's all? Brooks smiled faintly, sensing a weakness. A friend you were willing to perjure yourself for? Objection. Maya snapped. Argumentative. Sustained, said the judge, glaring at Brooks. The prosecutor paused for effect, then held up a printed document. Your Honor, this is the initial statement Miss Evans gave to investigators. Notice that she said she didn't see exactly how the accident happened. But 2 days later, she claimed that the victim had the right of way. That's a contradiction. Maya rose. Your Honor, that change happened after she learned the police report had been altered. She was correcting false information, not lying. Brooks turned toward Clara. Miss Evans, why did you change? Your statement only after learning that the driver was Detective Hale's son? Clara met his gaze calmly. Because that's when I realized the truth didn't matter to them. only their reputation did. The courtroom fell silent again. Even Brooks looked momentarily unsettled. Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair. His pen tapped against his notes. He'd known Detective Hale for years, a decorated officer respected in the community. But there had always been whispers, quiet internal affairs, complaints that never stuck, reports that disappeared. The judge cleared his throat. "Call the next witness." Brooks stood. "The prosecution calls Detective Arthur Hale." A stir ran through the audience as the detective stepped forward, tall, clean-cut, with the quiet arrogance of a man used to being in control. He took the oath and sat down, his badge gleaming under the lights. "Detective Hale," said Brooks, "you were the lead investigator in the Warren case." "Yes, sir." "And your findings concluded that the victim, Officer Daniel Warren, was intoxicated at the time of the accident?" "That's correct." Toxicology confirmed a blood alcohol level of 0.12. Clara's eyes widened. "That's impossible." Maya rose instantly. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense has not been provided with this supposed toxicology report." Brooks blinked, surprised. "It's in the case file." Maya shook her head. "No, it's not." Judge Morrison frowned. Mr. Brooks approached the bench. The two attorneys stepped forward. The judge's tone was sharp. "Mr. Brooks, was this report properly submitted to discovery?" Brooks hesitated. "Your Honor, I assumed the police department included it." "Assumed?" The judge's eyes darkened. "This isn't a coffee run, Mr. Brooks. You don't assume evidence exists. Produce the document or explain why you can't." Brooks swallowed. "I'll request it immediately, Your Honor." "Do that. And if I find out evidence has been withheld, I will hold the prosecution in contempt." The courtroom buzzed as Brooks returned to his table, his confidence shaken. When the court recessed for lunch, Judge Morrison stayed behind again. He requested a sealed meeting with Detective Hale in chambers. "Arthur," he said quietly, "what's going on here? The toxicology report, where did it come from?" Hale crossed his arms. "It's legitimate. The lab results came back the next day." "I've seen enough fabricated evidence in my time to know when something smells off," Morrison replied coldly. "And this one stinks." "Careful, Judge," Hale said with a faint smirk. "You're treading on dangerous ground." The judge rose from his chair, his voice rising. "Are you threatening me, Detective?" Hale shrugged. "Just saying, sometimes good people get burned trying to fix things they don't understand." Morrison's jaw clenched. "Get out of my chambers." The detective gave a slow, mocking nod. "Of course, Your Honor." As the door shut behind him, Morrison sank back into his seat, fury burning behind his calm exterior. He'd just witnessed corruption. And this time, it wasn't some nameless criminal. It was wearing a badge. That night, he couldn't sleep. He reread every document in the case, every witness statement. And then, tucked deep in the file, he found something odd, a preliminary lab report with a blank signature line. The numbers didn't match the final toxicology summary presented in court. It was a fake. And suddenly everything made sense. Clara's laughter, her despair, her defiance. She wasn't mocking justice, she was mourning it. The next morning, the courtroom was packed again. Cameras flashed, tension thick as smoke. Judge Morrison entered with a gravity no one could ignore. "Before we proceed," he said firmly, "I have ordered an independent review of the evidence submitted by the prosecution. The results delivered to my office this morning show inconsistencies. In the toxicology report of Officer Daniel Warren," the audience erupted in murmurs. Detective Hale's expression froze. The judge's voice cut through the noise like thunder. "This court will not tolerate deceit from anyone." He turned toward Clara. "Miss Evans, it appears you may have been telling the truth all along." For the first time in weeks, tears rolled down Clara's cheeks, not of sorrow but of relief. But the battle wasn't over. Detective Hale wasn't the kind of man to go down quietly. The air in the courtroom was so thick with tension that you could almost hear hearts beating beneath the silence. The woman who had laughed through her own trial, Clara, now sat motionless. her hands folded neatly on the defendant's table. But her eyes, they were no longer empty. They burned with something new. Judge Harris leaned forward on the bench, his voice low, deliberate. "Detective Miles, you may proceed with your testimony." The detective straightened his tie and smirked slightly, his badge catching the overhead lights. "Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself." The defendant admitted to pushing her husband from the balcony. The neighbors heard an argument and— "An argument?" The judge interrupted, his brow tightening. "Or a plea for help?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Detective Miles hesitated, just for a moment. "Sir, the department stands by the report." Judge Harris's eyes narrowed. "The department or you, detective?" Clara's attorney, Mr. Lewis, stood slowly. "Permission to cross-examine, Your Honor." "Proceed," said the judge. Lewis approached the witness stand, his steps measured. "Detective Miles," he began, "how long did you serve in the department with the late Officer Mark Clay?" The question hit like a gunshot. The detective's smirk faltered. "About 10 years. And Officer Clay was, remind me, a close friend of the victim, Mr. Benton?" The courtroom stirred again. Miles's jaw tightened. "Yes." "So when you were assigned to this case," Lewis continued, circling the witness stand, "you didn't find it odd that a close friend of the victim might also have connections inside the investigation?" The detective glared at him. "I did my job, that's all." Lewis turned sharply. "Then why?" he said, holding up a folder. "Did you fail to log the 911 call recording from that night? The one where a man's voice, not a woman's, was shouting threats?" A wave of gasps broke through the crowd. Judge Harris sat upright. "Detective, is this true?" Miles's lips parted. "That call was corrupted, unusable." Lewis opened the folder and pressed play on a small recorder. Static filled the room. Then faintly the sound of a man's voice yelling, "If you leave me, you'll regret it." And beneath it, a woman sobbing. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order, order!" Clara's laughter returned, but this time it was trembling, broken. "That's why I laughed," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Because no one ever believed me. They thought I was mad, but I knew the truth was out there. Just buried." Detective Miles shot up from the stand. "That recording is inadmissible. Chain of custody." Lewis cut him off. "Chain of custody? You mean the one you never filed because you were covering for your friend's killer connections?" Miles froze. A young journalist sitting in the back row whispered into her phone, "This is going live. The court's turning upside down." Judge Harris turned his gaze to the detective. "I'm ordering an internal review, effective immediately." His voice was thunder. "And until further notice, Detective Miles, you are relieved of duty." Miles clenched his fists, trembling with rage. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Judge." The judge leaned forward slowly. "I deal with truth, Detective. And it seems that's something you forgot." The courtroom buzzed again, half with relief, half with disbelief. Clara covered her face. "I didn't mean to laugh that day," she said softly. "It was just, when they accused me of murder, I thought after everything I'd survived, maybe that was the final joke life had for me." Judge Harris's tone softened, but his authority didn't waver. "Clara Benton," he said, "I believe you've been wronged, but justice demands proof. Mr. Lewis, do you have anything further to submit?" Lewis nodded and handed him a sealed envelope. "Found this at the precinct's records office early this morning. It's the forensics report, real one." Judge Harris opened it carefully. His face hardened. "Fingerprints," he murmured. "Not Clara's. They belong to Officer Mark Clay." A chill swept through the courtroom. "Clay killed Benton," Lewis said firmly. "And when Clara saw it, Miles helped cover it up to protect the department." Miles shouted, "Lies!" But the bailiff stepped forward, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Judge Harris raised his gavel once more. "This court will recess for 15 minutes, he announced, "after which I'll deliver my verdict." But as he stood to leave, Clara rose too. Her voice cracked through the room like lightning. "No need, Your Honor. Whatever happens, I already got my justice today." She looked at Miles, her tear-streaked face calm for the first time. "Because finally, someone heard me." The judge paused at the doorway, glancing back. "And the world will too." When the courtroom reconvened, the air was different. No one whispered this time. No phones, no nervous coughs, only the heavy silence of truth, the kind that humbles everyone who hears it. Judge Harris took his seat again, his eyes scanning every face in the room. Clara sat motionless, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the floor. The detective sat opposite her, his once confident posture now cracked by the weight of exposure. The gavel struck once. "Court is back in session." The judge's voice echoed through the chamber. "In the last hour, I've reviewed the forensic evidence presented by the defense and verified its authenticity with the clerk's office. The fingerprints recovered from the balcony railing match those of Officer Mark Clay, deceased." A tremor of disbelief passed through the courtroom. "Furthermore," he continued, "audio evidence recovered today indicates deliberate suppression of material facts by Detective Miles. For that reason, I'm issuing an immediate warrant for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering." Miles leapt to his feet. "You can't do this. You don't know who I work for." The judge's stare was pure steel. "That's exactly why I must." Bailiffs moved swiftly, their footsteps echoing as they escorted the stunned detective away. The metallic clink of handcuffs filled the chamber, a haunting sound of justice reclaiming its voice. Clara covered her mouth with trembling hands. Her laugh came again, soft this time. Not madness, not defiance, but release. Mr. Lewis placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over now, Clara." Judge Harris turned toward her. His tone shifted. No longer the stern authority of the bench, but the quiet compassion of a man who had just witnessed both cruelty and redemption. "Mrs. Benton," he said, "this court owes you an apology, and not just for what you endured, but for how long the system failed to hear you. I hereby declare all charges against you dismissed." Clara's tears fell freely. The spectators rose to their feet. Even the journalist in the back stopped taking notes, simply watching, stunned by the power of the moment. The judge paused, then added softly, "You once laughed when accused of a terrible crime. Today I hope you can finally smile for the right reason." Clara stood. She looked up at him through tears. "Thank you, Your Honor. I didn't laugh to mock the court. I laughed because it was the only thing left to keep me from falling apart." He nodded gently. "And sometimes, Mrs. Benton, strength looks like madness to those who don't understand pain." A quiet murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. As she stepped toward the courtroom doors, the journalist called out, "Mrs. Benton, what will you do now that you're free?" Clara turned, her voice soft but steady. "I'll go home," she said, "and visit the balcony where it all began. But this time I'll stand there without fear." Judge Harris watched her leave, then looked down at the stack of case files on his bench. For a long moment he said nothing. Finally he whispered to himself, "Justice isn't blind. It just takes time to see." He picked up his gavel and brought it down one last time. Bang! The sound echoed through the hallways, across marble floors and into the world beyond the courtroom. The sound of justice, hard-won and deeply human.